Hello everyone, this is Janet Salmons and I'd like to talk with you about online interviews for active online learning. While qualitative online interviews is written primarily for people who are preparing to collect data for formal research, the same kinds of approaches can apply well in the classroom. So, what are e-interview research projects and why use them? How can you design them? And what instructional issues might you need to consider? So first, why use online interviews in learning activities? I suggest that they're useful for bringing real-world expertise into the classroom by reaching subject matter experts, people with practical knowledge, or other kinds of information and background that would be helpful for gaining insight into the subject matter of the course. At the same time, they allow students to build the kinds of research skills they may need later on, either in academic or professional life. They can develop skills in online communication and in digital literacy. Qualitative online interviews can add an in-depth experiential component to the curriculum in courses that relate to work life that involves questioning, interviews, or collection of information or data in some way. I'm defining e-interview research projects here as a set of related individual or collaborative learning activities that include designing, planning, and conducting online interviews and reflecting on findings. Findings may be generated through a formal data analysis process or by a more informal summarization of responses to interview questions, depending on the amount of time you have available for the activity, the level of the class, and the importance on focusing on research skills that are involved with data analysis versus simply understanding what the participants had to say. Reflection may include verbal or written processes. So to plan the online interviews, they can think about ways to use different kinds of technologies, from text-based communications through video conferencing that could be conducted through a desktop application or even from a mobile device. Multi-channel web conference meeting spaces allow for a variety of ways to communicate, or they could go into a virtual environment or game. So those different kinds of technologies allow for different sorts of communication. Some involve writing, some involve spoken interviews. Either way, they'll need to think about the level of structure for the interview, how much they want to plan in advance, where they want to leave openings for conversation. So if they're planning the questions in advance, they'll need to articulate them, think about ways to follow up, or if they're planning for the more unstructured interview, to think about the kinds of topics they want to cover and the sort of guiding prompts that might allow participants to speak about their experiences. I'm placing this whole process within the active learning cycle, or stated by Kolb, because they'll begin by conceptualizing what they want to learn from the interview and preparing, designing, and planning to conduct it. And then, to experiment, they'll practice carrying out that interview. Then, they'll have the real experience by conducting the interview, and then the reflective observation needed to really analyze and understand what they've learned and then apply the ideas to have more insight into the topic at hand. These activities can be carried out in any milieu. Within the class, peer interviews can build social presence, allow for the development of trust and rapport and understanding, as well as simply learning about one another so that the other kinds of curricular discussions can have more meaning. By interviewing people in their own local communities, they can understand the issues, build relationships with local partners, and perhaps use the interviews to prepare for other activities such as field or service learning. Out in cyberspace, they can connect with people all over the planet and learn from experts not available locally. These experts may be either people with a high level of regard in the field or people with practical experience in the subject matter at hand, or they could be students in a class on the other side of the world. So let's walk through an example. Let's say you're teaching a class in almost any field where people work virtually, and you'd like to build an understanding about how leaders motivate members of virtual teams. So the students are going to go through these 4 active learning steps to prepare, design, and plan, practice, conduct, analyze, and reflect. So in the preparation stage, they're reading assigned materials. This could be scholarly literature or materials from the field that will help them to understand the issues involved with leadership and teams and the virtual world. Then at the design stage, they'll need to decide what information and communications technology tool to use, how they will use it, and identify the interview style that will fit best with that technology. Then, of course, they need to articulate the questions or the kinds of guiding themes they want to use in the interview. They can draw those from what they've learned in the reading, the unanswered questions, the emerging topics that they would like to have some more information about. Then the practical planning stage, to identify participants, gain an agreement, and make the arrangements to conduct the interview. In the practice stage, they can interview a peer and then use that experience to troubleshoot any problems. Were there any issues with the questions themselves? Were they able to develop a rapport, ask the questions, ask follow-up questions? Did the questions make sense to their peer? Were they too complex, too wordy? Perhaps include some jargon the person didn't understand. How could those questions be improved so that they're clear and will elicit the kinds of responses the student hopes to gain? Were there any technical problems or issues with features in the technology they chose? How can they handle those? Once all of that's been solved, they're ready to conduct the interview. Afterwards, they can compare and contrast the ideas and the practices described in the interviews with what they learned from the readings. In the reflection phase, they can think about whether the practitioner's views either complemented, reinforced, or perhaps contradicted what they've been reading on the topic. And then they can apply what they've learned, either by presenting an oral description of their experience or providing a written summary in an assignment. Through this process, there are many teachable moments for bridging theory and practice because they're able to bring those real-world perspectives into the classroom. And with a number of students interviewing diverse participants, they have a number of different new ideas to now think through and explore. They can look at the implications and the complications involved with real decisions made with actual team members that might be more muddy and complicated compared with some of the straightforward kinds of practices described in the text they've been reading. So they can compare and contrast the scholarly presentation and research articles and the practitioner's views on the topic. They're teachable moments about developing digital literacy because they can use diverse online communication tools and think about the ways that those tools either promote or obstruct the kinds of communication they wanted to have with the participants. They can consider the differences between different kinds of technologies and how one might choose based on the goals for the communication experience. And they can also assess the appropriate use of other materials. If perhaps they wanted to read content generated by the participants or about the participants' organizations, they need to think through the ethical use of that material. There are teachable moments in preparing these students as future researchers because they've gone through the important steps for planning an interview, creating and negotiating some kind of agreement with the participant, developing a credible and respectable presence as a researcher. So presenting themselves in a professional way might be a part of the value of this experience. Being able to ask questions and following up to the responses is kind of an art that is only learned by practice. And at the same time, they learn to respect parameters set by the participants. And whether they are actually fully analyzing the results or simply summarizing responses, they've still gotten a chance to think about what it means to take that data and try to derive some meaning from it. So I hope you'll consult qualitative online interviews for other kinds of interview strategies you can apply in the classroom.